One of the things that women tend to whine about is their fear of flying. I've included a chapter in my book, Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th Commandment, entitled Flying Without Whining. Before I tell you about the top 10 things that people whine about when they're flying, I'd like to give you a little bit of my background when it comes to flying and whining. I was the first one in my family to ever fly in an airplane, and not too many of them besides me have done it to this day, coated as they were with the whining about flying glitch. My grandma always said that if God had wanted her to fly, he would have given her wings, and she truly meant it. This wisdom applied to driving for her too. She wasn't born with tires attached to her legs, so she wasn't about to ride in a car. Back in 1963, despite my inbred terror, I actually flew to Miami on Eastern Airlines for an interview to become an airline stewardess. During that flight, I experienced such an incredible adrenaline rush on takeoff that I was barely able to breathe, let alone talk. In the air, I was thrilled to be defying the law of gravity. The view out the window was fabulous, and I was in awe of everything. The landing was a cinch, since by then, not only had I somewhat acclimated to flying, but I had been able to drink enough wine to get me down without screaming or making a scene. Long story short, I was hired, but I was too proud to admit that I couldn't fly without whining. Actually, I was so desperate to escape my boring life in Detroit that having to fly wasn't enough to stop me. Doing that job, I simply couldn't whine on pain of losing the job, so I just enacted some recessive stiff upper lip gene and smiled through my troubles. Despite my continuing terror, I really wanted to be a stewardess in the worst way, and sometimes I certainly was. Many, many years later, after my first husband was killed during a test flight, I continued to put on a brave front about flying for the sake of my children. Besides, I'm addicted to doing things that scare me silly when I'm trying to stop whining about life. To this day, it has been difficult to overcome the urge to indulge in whining while flying, mainly because I have never been able to understand how it all works. No matter how many times my second and current husband, who is a pilot, explains to me the mechanics of flight, I still don't get it. I never will be able to comprehend how a 747 airplane that weighs tons can lift off and soar through the skies. I do, however, have my own theory about how planes work. When I am on a plane during takeoff and I lift my toes upward, the plane will lift up and off without any problems. I don't know if I'm not doing it might cause a crash because I have never ever not done it. I must confess that this is not an original theory, but rather one that was passed down early to me in my flying career. It came my way from an older, wiser, and far more experienced stewardess who had already conquered her fear of flying. Upon the announcement of landing, one need only reverse the process and point your toes downward, and the plane will touch down with comforting grace. I can somewhat justify my previous problem of whining while flying because I experienced some really scary moments up in the air as a stewardess. There was an emergency foamed runway landing, and there were also hearing about other fatal accidents while serving cocktails. Extreme conditions that made my life flash before my eyes. These were all part of the daily routine in my chosen career. Another important part of it was to keep those things away from the passengers so that they wouldn't completely freak out. As for being a passenger nowadays, what's not to whine about, especially with the increased security, long delays, and the alarming trend for lost baggage? Fortunately, there's no more whining about the poor quality of food on the airlines since no food is actually served. Long ago, Wolfgang Puck once said, "To me, an airplane is a great place to diet," and it still is. Over the past few decades, I've considerably decreased the likelihood of my whining about flying because I can almost enjoy it when my husband, the pilot, is in the cockpit. I can even sleep while he's up front because I know there is someone driving that plane who wants to live as much as I do, if not more. One of our favorite flights together was when we were invited to land on the aircraft carrier, the U.S. Carl Vinson, in a Navy plane. Once on board, I spent the entire night there thinking about being catapulted off the deck the next morning. It was terrifying when it happened, but I didn't whine. I screamed a little as we were shot off the ship, but I didn't wet my pants. It seems my destiny was to fly, to wed flyers, and to raise flyers. I have one daughter who is a pilot, 2 daughters who have been flight attendants, and a son who is a non-whining frequent flyer. Even after all these years, I'm still a white-knuckle flyer, but at least now I can talk about it. Take it from me, it's possible to be fearful and brave at the same time, just as long as you don't whine about it.